yourself a friend. Lay down your defenses and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm really excited to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. Today we're talking about a very important aspect of the claims of the story of Jesus, and I'm really excited to bring this to you because it's a big portion of my life. Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson. I'm going to say this again because evidently the feed wasn't up just yet. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson. I'm a civil human servant. And so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And it's in that effort that I'm looking at my own spiritual heritage, the account of Jesus, the story of Jesus, to try to find those truths that I feel are applicable across the board to every human being, regardless of our different faiths, our different politics, our different lifestyles. And today, to reiterate, I just mentioned, but again, our feed just came on, and I want to reiterate that this conversation about the resurrection today is one that's been a huge part of my upbringing and my spiritual development and my look on life and my worldview, and has been one that's really plagued the church in many ways, trying to answer the question of, did the resurrection happen? Is there any proof? Is that something that we can hold on to as when we look at deciding our faith decisions? I want to walk through some of these things and to give you just a brief overview. I know we don't have as much time that we could spend on this issue because it is such a huge question, but at least I want to hit some very important parts of it and leave you with some thoughts to walk away with. So let's go ahead and jump into the passage. It's Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 15. Starting with verse 1. Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door, and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him, and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen." And he said, "Come, see the place where the Lord lay. And go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he's going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to bring his disciples word. And as they went to tell the disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, "Rejoice." And they came and held him by his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Now while they were going, behold, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all the things that had happened. When they had assembled the elders and taken counsel, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, saying, "Tell them his disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will appease him and make you secure." So they took the money and did as they were instructed. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day. So there's a lot that's happened in this passage. And what I want to do today is to walk through and just kind of go step by step through this passage to explain what's happening, because there is a little bit that's rounded up in the Jewish culture that's 2,000 years removed from our own. And I want to bring that across to give you an idea of what is actually trying to be said by Matthew, who wrote this particular account of Jesus. So let's go ahead and begin in this conversation. And at the end of it, I want to talk about my experience with this passage and to give you some different ways to maybe look at this and to even to think about faith and science. those questions. So let's go ahead and walk through the passage first, verse by verse. So as we begin, we have the women who are coming to visit Jesus. Again, I want to set this up really quickly. Jesus has just been crucified, which means being nailed to a piece of wood, naked, in front of the city gates of Jerusalem for passers-by to see and to take toll, to pay attention that Rome is in control. And so he has been taken now by this guy, Joseph from Arimathea, who he and two other women go together to prepare Jesus for a tomb. Joseph, this rich man, gives his tomb to Jesus and places the body, wraps it in linen, and places it in it. And so now 3 days and 3 nights have passed. And you may recall that we talked about Jesus sharing the fact that he was going to prove himself by raising himself from the dead, or being raised from the dead. So we are right now at that point on the timeline. And this is exactly what's going to happen. And so this is the account that Matthew gives us of that. One of the things I absolutely love about this is that the first people to find out that Jesus was resurrected, first people to hear the story, the first people to see Jesus are women. It's important to recognize that this text, when it said that 2,000 years ago in a society that was strongly patriarchal and strongly favored men in places of leadership and control over women, for Matthew to write this, to point this out as part of the story, and to make this part of Jesus' message, that women were the first ones to see Jesus and the first people he talked to. And they were the ones who prepared his body. They were the ones who stuck through him all the way through. I love this because it matters so much to me. You know, there's this tambourine up here in the corner with the colored ribbons. So this is it's my mother's tambourine. She passed away in my mid to late 20s from breast cancer. And I keep this because I like to remember the spirit that she had about her, the countenance, the way that she lived her faith, and to remember her example of what it looks like to love these teachings and to love people, and to do that with such life and such a vivid personality. And it's always kind of a reminder to me, as I get a little stodgy sometimes, I get a little geekish, and to be reminded that I also need to just, be a little colorful and vulnerable and be some of those things that she gave me as part of her passing on who she was to me. I know that's a sidebar, but I do want to point that out. This is a message even for our day and age today. 2,000 years removed, we're still working on this one. So what happens next? We have this severe earthquake that happens. We have this stone that's in front of the tomb that's split and rolled away. This guy who sits on it, messenger, it says angel, and we interpret it angel. I mean, that is literally the translation for it, but it also means messenger in many ways. So it's just a person who is doing the bidding of God. Whether or not this person has wings, we don't know. This isn't really something portrayed, but nonetheless, here's this guy who's evidently, he's very bright looking. That is, he's, radiating light, and he's clothed in white garments that are super white, like snow. And the guards are terrified, and the women are there too. That should be something to point out at this event. It seems that, so the guards are freaking out, right? Because they were not expecting this, and they probably just saw this as yet another martyr of one of the subclasses of humanity found in Judaism. It's just really what they thought. This Jewish prophet was not anything significant, but now stone's being rolled away. Some glowing dude is sitting on the stone now, and it says that they became scared and turned in fear and became as dead men. I'm assuming that Matthew's essentially saying they passed out, right? They fainted. And so the stone's rolled away, and then the angel says to them, literally the translation is, don't freak out or don't be afraid. I know you're looking for this Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He's risen. And if you want, just to make sure, you're welcome to go into the tomb, look to make sure he's not there. But I'm telling you, he's not there. Go see for yourself. And now hurry over to his disciples, the others, students, the dudes, right, for 12 of them, who are waiting to in kind of the background because they chickened out, right, and they didn't want to get crucified along with Jesus, so they've been out, for a couple of days hiding. And this guy tells these two women, go and tell these disciples that Jesus is risen, and also tell them that Jesus is going to go ahead of them into Galilee. Why? We'll find out tomorrow. But essentially, they start running. They're afraid. They don't know what's going on because, clearly if this event is really happening to them, it's pretty terrifying to experience all of that, but also excited. So then they run into Jesus on the way there, and he stops to comfort them. It says they worship him, and who wouldn't, right? A guy who raises himself from the dead would be a pretty convincing experience for me, and I probably would do something similar. And so they show this beautiful sort of worship and love by holding his feet, which is kind of their cultural way of doing that. Jesus says, hey, be happy. I'm risen. Now go ahead and go on to the disciples. And again, these are women, and in this culture, that is a huge statement that Jesus is talking to them first, which I absolutely love. And so they go and run and tell the disciples, and we're going to find out tomorrow what that looked like and how the disciples heard that story, because it is kind of surprising. Okay, and then we have these guards in the last part of this passage, and then we'll close talking about this resurrection. The guards, while the ladies go to talk to the men and convince them of what happened, the guards are going to the religious leaders, the Jewish leaders, who they were doing their job for, and say, hey, this is what happened. Just so you know, some dude rolled the stone away, sat on it, told us, Jesus is risen, we passed out, sorry, and what do we do? And so the religious leaders, they put a quorum together, they get the elders in the council, and they decide to basically bribe them and say, you are going to say that the disciples came and stole him in the night. Well, I love that Matthew ends this passage by saying that this is a story that is known by all the Jews even to this day. Matthew is essentially saying, this is ridiculous. For gosh sakes, it's a Roman guard. And for them to say that they fell asleep on the job is not only unplausible, it would mean that they could lose their lives as a result of it. Rome was very strict about these things, especially because there was a huge political cost to it. And they would have run, and they know that they would have paid for it if they had fallen asleep. So it's a little ridiculous that they fell asleep and that some guy moves a massive stone and breaks the seal around it, and the disciples quietly do that somehow and move Jesus out. It's ridiculous, and that's what Matthew's suggesting here. He's like, look, even the Jewish people who don't necessarily believe this story, they know that the guards were paid off. As to whether it happened or not, who knows? But the fact of the matter is, everybody knows this was a cover-up, which I think is just brilliant and amazing to see that there are cover-ups even back then, of course. And so they, of course, say, look, if it gets to Pilate, don't worry, we'll protect you. And so that's the end of the story there. So in conclusion on this, I want to begin by emphasizing how this question of the resurrection and whether it happened has affected me in my life. So I came from a very conservative, evangelical, Pentecostal holiness tradition. Those are the people who speak in tongues and roll in the aisles, and I didn't necessarily do the rolling in the aisles bit, but I definitely did a lot of the other stuff. And we were focused on holiness and being closer to God, and therefore being better people as a result of it. The difficulty for me, I was a public school kid, so a lot of my friends at the church, of course, were private school kids, and so everybody around them basically assumed the same thing. It was not that way for me. I went to a public school where people were challenging me all the time, and yes, I was one of those guys who was wearing the t-shirt, that Jesus, Property of Jesus t-shirt. That's just who I was. And I talked about Jesus a lot. I was that guy. And, people would constantly challenge me, and I loved it, actually. I really did. But it was so frustrating because I didn't have any answers for them. When they said, well, prove it, how do you know that your God is the God that is the true God? How do you know that what you're saying is true above everybody else who's making these claims? And even then, how do you even acknowledge that there's a God out there? There's no science, there's no proof of it. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. As I went on in my studies in ministry, it became a bit of a focus for me to focus on the defense of the faith, to answer these questions. And most of the time, the way that it was answered from the Christian side of things was that the resurrection did happen, and that even though there's no proof of it, there's nothing to contradict it, that obviously the guards would not have fallen asleep, so that even the story here breaks down. They would use other arguments that would suggest, for instance, that it is unlikely that a group of individuals who believed in a lie that they knew to be a lie would go to such lengths to propagate and to evangelize this story, even to the point of every single one of them, for the most part, being martyred in a horrific way. That it's unlikely that people would do that for the sake of something they knew to be a scandalous lie. And it's a compelling argument to some extent, but it doesn't solve the problem of proving anything. And I want to talk about that. Faith and reason, faith and science. The church I grew up in saw faith as above science and above reason. That, science was great at describing the world around us, but when it came to God, there was a big line in the sky, and above that line was God and the truth and everything above science and beyond science. And that's the way I grew up. Until I went on to study in my own ministerial education in theology, and it's called apologetics, which is the defense of the faith study. And then I had this perspective that suggested that there's reason to suggest that a resurrection happened. And that was kind of where they left it. It was magic. There was a magic God, and that it actually happened in history. And they'd offer the same kinds of arguments that I just did for you. And the whole point of that was that they said, because of these things, because Jesus demonstrates him to be God, himself to be godlike, it means that his message is best and most important and above everybody else. That was essentially the basics of it. I want to give you where I've come to right now, like where I've gotten to, where I've found myself lately. I am not perfect in this conclusion, but I want to offer it to you because these are the things that I've thought my whole life about. I want to give you a different perspective of how to handle the science and the faith and the reason aspect. Yes, absolutely. There are no YouTube videos. There are no documents outside of the Bible that describe the resurrection for us as a historical event. We do have proof of Jesus outside of the Bible in other historians recording it, so we know that much is likely true. But what do we do with these miraculous claims here, especially resurrection? I mean, come on, it's a ridiculous claim, really, when it comes to what we have observed in human experience and in history. So when we come to the question of whether it's provable or not, I have to be honest. It's one of the foundations of my civil human ministry is that I will be honest about what I can observe and what I can't observe. I can observe that there's a historical record claiming that this happened. I can observe that there's no proof against it, but I can also observe that we've never had anything like that happen before, nor do we possess the ability to resurrect ourselves. That said, when we look at science fiction, I want to take a Star Trek perspective rather than a Harry Potter perspective, right? So a lot of the Christians today in the church look at the resurrection of Jesus as this sort of magic spell, and that, Gandalf is God in the sky, and, they wave a wand, and so therefore he's proving that he's the master sorcerer or the master magic person, therefore God. and he raises himself from the dead. See, there's proof. I look at it a little differently. I look at it from a Star Trek perspective. Many of you may know Next Generation's episode where there's this ancient form of humanoid people on a planet, and the Star Trek, group ends up having to interact with them in a way. Somebody gets captured, and so they get discovered. And Picard, who's the captain of the ship, becomes known as God to these people because they can teleport, because they can heal people, because they can do magical things. That's kind of where I go these days. I look at this story and I think to myself, okay, if this is an advanced being out there, because that's those of us who come from a religious perspective, who claim that there's a God or have that belief, that's what we're saying, that there's another life out there. That this life has been around longer than we have, has advanced far more, longer than we are aware of, and knows things and how to manipulate this world or this universe in ways that we can't even fathom yet. That, okay, so he interacts with human nature and human experience to share a message, to demonstrate the kind of nature and the kind of example of how to be a good human being in this universe. And so he goes down, teaches a lot of stuff, shows them that he is able to do something more advanced. Bada bing, bada boom. That's essentially the argument. Then that Jesus was something somehow connected to something more advanced. Now, this seems a little ludicrous when you say it like that, but that's really what we are saying as people of faith. And the reality of it is, wow, we know we've been around for 13.8 billion years. Humans, we've been here just a little blip of a dot right at the end. To suggest that we are the only life in this universe is an option. And it's possible to say and to believe and to conclude that there's no other life because we haven't observed it yet. But I believe it isn't probable. I believe that there is a better possibility that there's a God out there because we exist. And the fact that we exist as life means that there might be other life there. And perhaps it's been around longer, and perhaps it had a hand in creating us or in fashioning our society. I don't know, but that's kind of how I come at it. And I want to provide that for you, not because I think that's what you should agree with or that you should come to the same conclusion as I do, but it's how I've kind of dealt with this and looked at it from a position of how do I reasonably bring science to faith and answer my own questions and claims and be fair with people, especially scientists and atheists who are asking these questions and demanding them rightfully so of us as humans, especially when we require it of other people. I wanted to offer that to you, and I hope it's been interesting and possibly given you some other options of how to think about this. It certainly has been a journey in my life. I'm so grateful. This is the second to last episode. Tomorrow will be my last episode. We'll be finishing up the book of Matthew. I'm so excited about that because this last passage is such a compelling part and has such good words for us as human beings. And I so appreciate you being a part of this. Please leave your comments or your suggestions, your disagreements and agreements in the comments below the video because I want to hear them. And I love to hear what your thoughts are. It's how I grow. It's how we all grow. And until tomorrow when we have our last episode, live at noon, I want you to know I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It's the only love that we have any control over in this world. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.